When people talk about the causes of the American Civil War, we often hear a simplified version. Some states wanted to free the slaves, while others wanted to keep exploiting African Americans for profit. It's the classic Hollywood narrative, where the hero is good just because he's the hero, and the villain is bad just because he's the villain. But reality was far more complex. In this video, we'll break down what actually led to the conflict between the North and the South, and what the war ultimately led to. By the mid-19th century, the United States was essentially a nation divided into two different worlds. The North was rapidly industrializing. Factories were being built, railroads laid, banks expanded, and cities grew. Fueled largely by immigrants and wage laborers, the Northern economy was booming, built on the foundation of free labor. The South, on the other hand, remained rural and agricultural. Its economy depended on large plantations and slave labor. Millions of enslaved black people harvested cotton for export to Europe, bringing massive profits to plantation owners. Northern states pushed for high tariffs on imported goods to protect their growing industries. Southern elites were strongly opposed. They feared that Europe would retaliate with its own tariffs or stop buying Southern cotton altogether, threatening the South's economic lifeline. These economic and cultural differences were deeply reflected in politics. Northern states had far more citizens eligible to vote, a direct result of their economic structure. In an industrial society, it's more profitable to hire free men than to keep slaves, especially in cold climates where maintaining a slave's basic needs is costly. The South, with its warm climate and agricultural economy, found slavery economically efficient. Slaves didn't get paid, and their upkeep was minimal, just enough food, shelter, and water to keep them working. These differences also meant the South had fewer free people, which translated into less political power on the federal level. By the start of the Civil War, the U.S. had 33 states, 18 northern and 15 southern. In the House of Representatives, the North held 144 seats, compared to just 94 for the South. Since laws passed by simple majority, the South had little control over legislation. In the Senate, where each state had 2 votes regardless of population, the numbers still didn't favor the South, 36 northern votes versus 30 southern. Meanwhile, new states like California, Oregon, and Minnesota were joining the Union on the northern side, while pro-southern territories like New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah hadn't yet been granted statehood. The one remaining tool the South had to block unfavorable laws was the presidential veto, but that slipped away in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln, a Northern candidate, won the presidency. In some Southern states, Lincoln's name wasn't even on the ballot. In the end, he won without receiving a single Southern vote. That was the last straw. On December 20th, 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Within weeks, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed. By February 1861, they had formed the Confederate States of America, CSA, with their capital in Montgomery, Alabama. Later, 4 more states joined the Confederacy: Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. Some slaveholding states, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and Delaware, chose not to secede, despite their economic ties to the South. Secession quickly led to civil war, a 4-year-long conflict that ended in a Northern victory. The war's most significant outcome was the abolition of slavery. On January 31, 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, officially banning slavery nationwide. But it's important to remember, Lincoln wasn't originally an abolitionist. He said openly that his top priority was to save the Union, not to resolve the moral issue of slavery.
I do not believe I have the right to interfere with slavery where it already exists. My primary goal is to preserve the Union.
So the abolition of slavery was, first and foremost, a strategic political and economic move meant to weaken the South by stripping away its labor base. By removing their main economic engine, the North ensured victory and forced the Southern states into alignment with its industrial vision for the country. After the war, the U.S. did exactly what the South feared. It implemented high import tariffs, with some reaching as high as 50%. And just as Southerners had predicted, Europe retaliated, either by slapping on their own tariffs or shifting trade to other markets like Asia. The result was economic collapse in the South. It took decades for the region to even begin recovering. And even today, the divide is visible. Many Southern states still lag behind the North in income, infrastructure, and quality of life. And what about the freed black population? On paper, they were now free. But in reality, freedom didn't mean equality. Freed slaves received no land, no money, no real government support. Most remained on the same plantations where they had been enslaved, now working as underpaid laborers in a system called sharecropping, where they rented land from their former masters and paid with a portion of their crops. It was slavery in everything but name. Southern states also passed black codes, laws that severely limited the rights of African Americans. These codes restricted their freedom of movement, access to jobs, education, voting rights, and even marriage. A new system of repression took hold, the Jim Crow era. Black Americans were free, yet subjected to brutal segregation. Separate schools, hospitals, train cars, bathrooms, even drinking fountains, all separate but equal in theory, but profoundly unequal in practice. And anyone who resisted could face lynching, often without any legal consequence. Even in the North, where Jim Crow laws technically didn't exist, racial segregation still flourished. It showed up through housing discrimination, denial of loans, job refusals, segregated schools, and redlined neighborhoods. It wasn't written into the law, but it was deeply woven into everyday life. But don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming the Southerners. They just didn't want to live side by side with black people, so they passed those kinds of laws. And honestly, it's fair to say that a lot of black folks back then also wanted to live separately from whites, as long as the separation was actually fair. If black schools, hospitals, and even bathrooms had been just as good as the white ones, there wouldn't have been much to complain about. What I see as hypocrisy is that the North, the so-called winners of the war, let the defeated white Southerners discriminate against black people, while at the same time doing pretty much the same thing in their own states. All the while pretending they were the champions of freedom and equal rights for everyone in America. And that's something worth remembering. The next time someone tells you the Civil War was simply a battle between bad Southerners and good Northerners.